Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 59th Right and Left Discussion Forum. The purpose of our discussion forum is to demonstrate the power of an open mind in discussing contentious topics. Today, our panelists will discuss the pros and cons of a flat federal income tax. Flat meaning all taxpayers would pay the same percentage of income with no deductions. Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Jerry Ritzman, the chairman of the board of Ritzman Natural Health Pharmacies. On his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and current member of the Wadsworth City Council. Ron, the flat tax as we know it was first suggested by economist Milton Friedman clear back in 1962, the year Brenda and I were married. I don't know what month he did it, but Friedman called for a single tax rate on all incomes regardless of the source with no deductions. The chief advantage was an enormous savings to the government and taxpayers, but many resisted the idea of a single rate for both the top and bottom earners. What's your view?
John, I hadn't a chance to think about this since about 2011 when Herman Cain proposed a 999 tax situation. And I have to apologize to you and the panel and our viewers due to a personal situation. I have had an opportunity to really dig into this the way I might like. But
yes, but as an old liberal, this ought to strike you right in the heart.
Well, looking at it from different ways, it looks like, as the reading I've been able to do, it looks like it does fall into a kind of a conservative versus liberal dichotomy here. And for example, articles in Forbes about 2011 pointed out some statistics on there and touted its simplicity, its fairness, its ability to promote growth since there wouldn't be extra taxes on investments and savings. All that's to the good. On the other hand, Robert Reich, the world's foremost liberal at this point, I think, says that, and I quote, "The flat tax is a fraud. It raises taxes on the poor and lowers them on the rich." Mm-hmm. And thinking about it, he said, sort of have a flat tax. Within our tax brackets, it's flat. And maybe it seems fair. It does appeal. The fairness, quote, fairness appeals to it. On the other hand, think about this. To charge a percentage of income to everybody is much more of a burden on people in the poverty line than it is on people in the upper limits. Right now, the first 20,000 or so of your income is you have deductions, and some of the plans that are out there do give that kind of deduction, a family-based deduction. However many children you have, how many dependents you have, you get a deduction even within that. Certainly looking at the excesses and the problems with the Internal Revenue Service. I'm sure, Jerry, you can tell us about what a nightmare it is for a small business owner to try to cope his way through the only thing I think of that's more complicated is Medicare, but we'll get into that some other time. I can't understand, but anyway.
Einstein called the income tax code the most complicated thing in the world. Well, that's Einstein.
By Einstein, absolutely. Well, you know, he didn't do well in grade school himself. but at any rate, looking at what appears to be a less compassionate way of handling income inequality by the flat tax than a graduated system leads me, as you would expect as a liberal, leads me more into the graduated system, into progressive tax system. And I think there are excesses in it. Certainly if you had a flat tax, it would put all the tax preparation industry out of business. Mm-hmm. And there's one people who would
no, they'd have to find out something new to do, like millions of other people, including yours truly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's okay. You know, everyone needs a new opportunity from time to time. So, at any rate, I tend to feel that at this point, at this reading, with my rather shallow level of research on this so far, that a more progressive system is probably more fair to everyone along the lines. Mm-hmm. A certain amount of loopholes, certain amount of deductions are going to be necessary. And even fair to do it, and so.
Okay, Jerry, where do you come down?
Well, you know, fair is a value judgment. You know, questions that come to my mind. You know, corporate, are they the same as individuals? Is that flat tax the same? How about nonprofits, as we now put them? Do they get taxed or not? They are taking advantages of the same services that us as individuals do. Why do not they contribute to the infrastructure or anybody? Does it apply to, you know, it's to all citizens? I mean, Margaret Thatcher's conservative view is it doesn't matter what your income level is, you need to be vested in the country that you live in. And whether you have a meager income, you still need to contribute to the common good. You know, and currently there are probably a number of individuals that don't pay income tax. And it lowers the taxes on the rich and increases it on those that don't have that much income, but that's because of the way the system is now designed. It's not really the fault of doing the flat tax. That's the way that we've graduated it. You know, and in thinking about this, and I didn't do research, I did thinking about it, but I'm thinking, why are we even, as a nation, when it was last discussed, why are we even expending any energy even talking about this? Because it isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen, because as soon as we say flat tax, somebody's going to say, oh, well, let's exempt the first 20,000. And then they're going to say, yeah, but then we need to need to exempt for corporations their capital expenditures.
And how about
and
mortgage?
What about those guys that are buying a house? Pretty soon we're going to be back to where we are right now, and we're spending all this energy on flat tax, no flat tax, even discussing it when there are more pressing issues to be solved.
Near as I can tell right now, we're the only people discussing
Well,
it.
I mean, it'll come up again. It'll come up again. But you know, I don't know who.
Didn't Rick Perry have something?
Yeah.
Less,
It'll get recycled, and I'm saying, you know, there are special interest groups who will lobby the heck out of it not ever happening. And you mentioned a couple, Ron. You know, and I don't know how many pages in the tax code, in the IRS tax code, John?
There are 80,000.
80,000 pages. And so that's making a lot of jobs for accountants and CPAs and tax lawyers and that type of thing.
Not to mention printers.
And it's probably mostly online now. But, you know, it's attractive. The flat tax is attractive because, as many things, it seems to be the single, simple solution to a complex problem. If you think flat tax, whatever percent for everybody, that's all it is. It'll be a 2-page document. It won't be, and it will start to creep away from there. And you know, you're going to have the argument that, well, the lower income people or the higher income people are paying less, whatever. You're going to have that argument. It's not going to happen. It is not going to happen, I don't think. And so that simple solution to a complex problem, there always is one of those, and they usually are wrong. Yeah.
Robert Reich also points out, talking again about Herman Kahn's 9%, he said, you know, politicians, it's not going to stay 9%.
No.
So,
Yeah.
Patty.
Yes. You know, in researching this, I mean, obviously there's so many problems with our present day tax system. I think you had quoted to us a figure of something like close to $18 million that was being wasted by fraud each year.
How about 13 billion?
13 billion, okay, with fraud, and that's not collected. And the actual cost to, you know, because of the employees that are involved, also the CPAs, you know, what it's costing the economy to do it. And there are pros for it in that if you do have the flat tax, you would start from square one and you would make it less confusing. You know, and it has been suggested, it was suggested by Perry, his was a kind of a hybrid plan of it, in 2011, 2012, Herman Cain had his 999 plan. I believe that Ron Paul and Rand Paul have both suggested flat taxes.
Rand has one on the table right now, as well as Marco Rubio.
Marco Rubio has one as well. The problem that I have with all of that is, and it's both of the other panelists have addressed this, is that it deflects the accountability of the richer in our society and passes it on down the line to the middle class and to the poor in the society. With a 20% flat tax, it's estimated the top 1% would each pay $200,000 less than they are presently paying. I know with Herman Cain's 999 plan, middle class, like 40, 50, 60,000, would have each paid $4,000 more. So you're taking it up here and you're putting it down here. The whole idea, though, when it's proposed, is that if we give more money to the job creators, which is the buzzword on the right and has been for the last couple of years, that if they have more money, they will invest more, they will pay their employees more, and it will trickle down into the lower portions of our society, which I don't think that trickle-down economics has ever worked. I just saw this on the news a couple of days ago, and it was fascinating. 20 years ago, the ratio of executive earnings to employee earnings was 20-1. For every dollar that the employee made, the employer was making $20. Today, it is 300-1. So what has happened is that our extremely wealthy have gotten wealthier, and it has not passed down to the worker at that level. Those are just some of the things. And on a personal note, when you think about, for example, senior citizens, and I can think of my father, who passed away a few years ago, but Dad worked all his life. He was a World War II vet, was in the entire war, worked for B.F. Goodrich, had a good job there. His Social Security and pension together, I think, was about $1,700 a month. And he didn't have to pay taxes on that. But now, fortunately, my father had saved up. He was a child of the Depression and knew how to save. But $1,700 a month, that is not a lot to live on. Even if you own your house and all of this, think of trying to live on that amount and then take 10 or 20% off of that. Even though that's a smaller amount of money, and Ron, you alluded to this, that is has such dire consequences to that person on the low end as it does on the high. Now, if you were to start, and this is kind of what you were talking about, Jerry, you start making exclusions. You say, okay, we'll have this rate for the top 1%, we'll have this rate here, which is, I think, what Perry was doing. And actually, Ronald Reagan had a plan like that, where he wanted to simplify it by putting into like 3 or 4 classifications and then changing the rate. Mm-hmm. It's tough. But even when you go straight income, if you're at the high end, you can hide your income.
Yeah, the statistic on that is because of the lower rate on capital gains, and the fact that folks in the upper echelons of our society get a lot of their income from capital gains. Their average income tax rate is about 17%, rather than the 35%, which is the maximum at this time. Mm-hmm.
Right. They're not paying that now, and I don't think they'd end up paying it later. Mm-hmm. Plus, you would only tax money that's, I believe it's only income accrued here in the United States, so if you have holdings overseas, you wouldn't get taxed on that, which is interesting.
Yeah, the offshore accounts and all that. On the other hand, the value-added tax hasn't been particularly friendly to folks in Europe. Mm-hmm. But you have to avoid, I think, and maybe this is a conservative point of view, you have to avoid an appearance of class warfare, where you're trying to penalize the rich.
Yeah.
Right, but you don't want to penalize the rich, but you don't want to penalize the poor either. So, that the idea of fair, as you said.
Yeah.
I mean, what is fair for each group? Because what's fair
Depends
to me,
on which group you're in.
yeah, what's fair to me may not be fair to you.
Sure.
But also, and if they don't, I mean, I don't know if a flat tax collects the same amount of money as is being collected now. Would there be as much
It would depend
tax?
on what plan you were talking about. But to your point, and also Jerry's, about deductions, Steve Forbes, who is probably the most noted champion of the flat tax,
Yes.
said that if you start off with one deduction, it's like rabbits. Pretty soon they're going to multiply, and you can't have any. Excuse me. You can't have any exceptions if the system is going to work. But to the point about corporations, there are so many of them that don't pay any taxes at all.
GE,
Well,
wasn't that one of them?
this is a report from the Citizens for Tax Justice, and I don't know exactly what year. Oh, yes, I do, 2012. Over a 5-year period, many profitable U.S. corporations paid little or no federal income tax from 2008 to 2012. The companies there were of 288 profitable companies paid no taxes at all, including Boeing, GE, Verizon Communications, and they paid none for 5 years. And then there was another group of 111 companies that paid no federal income tax in at least one of the 5 years measured. If there was a flat tax of 14.5%, these people would not have gotten off scot-free. They would not. And when I think about the tremendous investment that a Fortune 500 company makes in trying to not pay taxes, I know that I worked for probably the very smallest of the Fortune 500 companies. We just got in under the wire. And, but we had a department with 2 vice presidents and probably 5 or 6 other full-time people doing nothing but looking at taxes and trying to figure out how to avoid them. And there, when you stop and think of a company the size of GE, with massive staffs, excuse me, outside consultants and with lobbyists and all of the things that they can do to influence government, to make regulations or to interpret some of these god-awful regulations that are so subject to interpretation. But they would be paying taxes. I'd rather they pay 14.5% flat right off the top than to be able to avoid all of them altogether. And that's a troublesome thing to me. But the
Well, it's establishing that rate too. Is it 14? Is it 10? Is it 20?
the reason I said 14.5 is that probably the most reasonable program out there right now is the one by Rand Paul, and it is sort of admired by Steve Forbes. Likes the idea. The one that Marco Rubio is proposing actually has 2 different levels, and once you get 2, you're going to get 4. And, it's going to go on like that.
Well, how about the concept too? We're treating corporations as persons, so is that a double tax? The individuals who work in that corporation, the individual who owns that business, is he paying double taxes, he or she?
Let me share an idea that I've been laughed at for 10 or 12 years at least in various discussions. I don't think that a corporation should be paying income tax at all. And my reason for saying that is that any corporation that manufactures a product that they sell to somebody else builds taxes into the product, the price of the product. They're anticipating them. But at the end of the year, they don't make a profit. They don't pay the taxes. They collect them, but they don't pay them. I'm not the only person that said that a corporation can't pay taxes anyway. They just collect them from their customers. But the idea that a company gets rewarded for bad management by not having to pay taxes. When I think about an automobile manufacturer, very profitable, and they pay a lot of taxes, and they're competing with somebody that's poorly managed, and they don't pay taxes, but they're selling competitive cars at the same price. I don't like that idea. I would rather that you think about, excuse me, as an individual, we pay taxes based on what we bring in, or our revenue.
Yeah.
And I think corporations ought to do the same thing. That whatever the tax rate is, pay it on the sales.
Of course,
on
many
your revenue.
corporations now, businesses are not paying taxes when they open up because they move into a city, they get a tax rebate.
Well, that's for local taxes.
And that's for local, but that can amount to a lot. And and one of the conditions, and there's a plan here in town where, if the company brings in or increases their number of jobs, they can get a tax rebate for that by increasing the jobs. The city will make out because there's more people working, and we get our money back. But that's being done a lot.
John, what you described is the commercial activity tax, the CAT tax in Ohio. The top, where there's a tax on the top line.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and that started, I don't know, 4 or 5, whatever years ago. And that affects different businesses differently. If you have a business with high margins, it doesn't affect you as much as if you have a business with slimmer margins,
As you do, probably.
and that, so it's going to affect different businesses differently. There's a lot of unhappy folks about the commercial activity tax in the state of Ohio.
Yeah.
Is it just in Ohio, or is that
Well, it may be in
prominent
other
throughout?
states too, but I think it was initiated in Ohio. And there are companies that located out of Ohio because of the CAT tax. They were about to build a distribution facility in the Columbus area. The CAT tax came in because they were going to get taxed on their top line sales, and it's not a huge rate, but it's a lot of dollars, and they had a slimmer margin, and so they built their facility. I think it's in Wheeling, West Virginia, and they shipped to everybody in Ohio.
Yeah.
The other company was put at a disadvantage because they had just built a new distribution on the outer ring of Columbus, and they weren't going to change their new facility, so they're paying the CAT tax, and they're put at an advantage. Now, if you do it nationally, that would wipe out that differential, but
Well, maybe that's why
it affects
I've been
different
laughed at
businesses.
for 10 years.
Well, but your thought of corporations not paying tax at all is different than that.
On income.
Yes, right.
Yeah. The one thing that you have to admit is tempting is to get rid of the IRS altogether. I mean, when you stop and think that they've got 82,000 full-time employees, they have a budget of $13 billion, and like every other government office and agency I've ever heard of, they're always complaining about being underfunded. And there's certain things they can't do because of it.
John, let's parallel Greece with the U.S.
I'd rather not.
In the Greek, in the information that's coming through in the Greek financial crisis, they're saying what large percentage of people don't pay. They don't even file their taxes that they're required legally to do. And so the government's not getting the money they need. The estimates are made, I think, that if people would be paying their taxes that they really should be paying in Greece, that they wouldn't be in the financial trouble that they're in.
So you're saying you need an organization
So you need,
for
whether the
enforcement.
IRS is inefficient or whether it's whatever, there's anomalies or corruption there or people violating, at least the threat of it makes most of us file an income tax return.
You got to factor.
That's all I'm
Got to
saying.
factor in fear and greed.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Basic motivators, right?
Well, recently they've been, to Patty's point, they've been paying out $15.6 billion. Well, they did last year, $15.6 billion in improper payments on the tax credit. There's another word in there.
Earned income.
Yes. and that and they're saying they don't know how to correct the problem. They're going to have to keep paying it out because they're understaffed and they can't fix the problem. But let me ask you this: that Jerry mentioned Margaret Thatcher and her comment about people not having a stake in the government, and as Mitt Romney so famously pointed out 3 years ago, 2.5, that 47% of Americans don't pay income tax. And that, but does that mean they don't really have a stake in government, or they think differently about government than they would if they paid at least something?
I don't necessarily think so.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe they'd feel resentment.
Yeah.
You're a discussion panel. You're supposed to know these things.
Well,
No, we just have to have an opinion.
And especially those that are not paying because they are so low. You know, if you look at a senior citizen and you say, hey, I paid my taxes year after year after year after year. Now I am in my retirement getting my paltry little amount, and you still want money on that. You know, I would be a little upset with that.
I have just enough savings that I cash in from my my 401k that I pay taxes on my Social Security. So, no.
You gotta see what happens when you're self-employed.
Oh dear.
Oh, you come to the end of the year and you find out, well, I thought I had some money in the bank, but not anymore. Not
Makes
anymore.
it difficult.
Yeah. Well, the most multinational corporations are paying lower tax rates here in the United States than they do on their foreign income. And there's a lot of conversation about being the highest taxed. We may have the highest rate, but nobody pays it.
That's true.
And with a flat tax, everybody would be paying
Accountable?
something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that I think the idea of everybody having a stake in government is a very, very good idea. But, well, I want to thank you all for a very nice discussion. And again, I have no quote. I had one, but I forgot to write it down. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Oh.
Jerry, did we get you out of here?